How's it, everybody? Welcome back to me, the Fontainer. Two things to cover in this video. Number one, APT, PSR, FFP, etc. And number two, Newcastle's new stadium plans. First of all, I just want to say a huge amount of thank you for all of the support received on my previous video. I really do appreciate it. I'm really overwhelmed by how many people share the same concerns in terms of the future of the game and the current rules set by the Premier League in terms of PSR, APT, FFP, etc, etc. If you haven't had a chance to see that video, you can click on it over here. This topic and this talking point has come to light again this week. Chelsea were hit with 74 charges by the FA this week due to alleged breaches of agent regulations by the FA. Those charges relate to the period between 2009 and 2022, and it's reported that these charges relate to transfers, including that of Eden Hazard, Willian and Samuel Eto'o at the time. It's purely going to be a financial fine in terms of a slap on the wrists. It's like asking the desert to pay a fine in sand. I mean, it's absolutely not going to hit them at all. We do have to be clear though, it was Chelsea who self-reported these breaches. This was at a time when Blue Co were purchasing Chelsea. They found irregularities in the books and they themselves reported it to the FA. As a result, at that time, the new owners withheld £100 million of the £2.5 billion they bought the club for at the time. But again, this smacks to the topic of APT, PSR, FFP that everyone is talking about at the moment. I do want to suggest or throw out another acronym to everybody, and that's called LPF. A level playing field. It's absolutely clear to all types of supporters, whether or not you're at the top six, whether or not you're at the clubs trying to get into Europe, or those Premier League clubs trying to stay in the Premier League, and even those clubs in the Championship who've been bouncing up and down over the last couple of years. English football needs to change in terms of how it's run financially. We spend so much time talking about the finance side of things, and let's be honest with you, football is a business these days. But what's not clear to us, the fans, is the irregularities in terms of how football clubs are set up financially and how some clubs are getting away with certain things and some clubs are not. We need to think about why PSR came about in the first place. PSR was introduced in the 2015-26 season with the main aim of promoting financial stability within clubs and to ensure that clubs could operate within their means, but primarily to prevent the financial collapsing of clubs. For example, think about Portsmouth. Now, I can understand that the intent at the time was for the good of football, for the good of players, for the good of fans. But the world has absolutely changed in 10 years. And the concept of PSR has had intended or unintended negative consequences for a lot of clubs. I am interested in the view of Big Six supporters in terms of if they think it's absolutely fine and working for them. But as a Newcastle fan and thinking about Villa and Crystal Palace and Fulham, for example, there definitely seems to be a two-tier them and us system in the Premier League. And the argument is or should be that if you perform well as a football club on the pitch, that you should be financially able to grow and or be rewarded by doing so. An example of this is Man United having an absolutely horrific season last season, not qualifying for Europe, but being able to spend hundreds of millions of pounds this year and completely just wipe off last year as if it didn't happen. We all know Ratcliffe was laying off the tea ladies because the club was financially stricken, but then going and spending hundreds of millions of pounds to deliver Amarin a completely new squad so that he can play the way he wants to play. That literally cannot happen in any other club because of the way PSR is set up. How many other clubs can afford to spend 80 million on a Anthony flop, for example, and sell that same player for a quarter of the price? All of the other clubs would financially not be able to do this. And that's what I mean in terms of a level playing field. If you look recently, for example, at Crystal Palace, who had an unbelievable season last year, which saw them beat Man City in the FA Cup final and then get into Europe. But as a result of success, which as I just said is success on the pitch. But as a result of that, other big clubs can just go and cherry pick their best players. We've seen Eze go to Arsenal. We've seen Guehi almost go to Liverpool. And the biggest obvious example of success on the pitch is when Leicester eventually won the Premier League back in the 2015-16 season. It's almost a little bit ironic that that's when PSR did come into play. They were absolutely pillaged of their youth stars, that being the engine of their midfield in N'Golo Kante, and as we know, the glitter stardust of the team, Riyad Mahrez, ended up going to Man City. Now, I know there's always going to be big dogs and small dogs in football, and one of the reasons we love the Premier League is the fact that David can beat Goliath on any given day. But that's the beauty of football on the pitch. The fact that David has got no chance of taking on Goliath in the boardroom or within the finance area makes the whole model of PSR, APT, etc., completely unfair. Every single football fan tunes into a game because we know that the result is not a foregone conclusion. But what does seem to be set is this financial modelling of the Premier League. For example, I did mention in my last video about Man City agreeing a settlement with the Premier League regarding APT rulings. Now, it is reported that the deal the Premier League are going to allow Man City to get away with is a mammoth 1.5 billion sponsorship deal with Etihad. That deal is over 10 years and includes an escalator payment model where basically it's £100 million in the first year and then another £100 million in year 2 plus 5%. So over the course of the next 10 years, that total could be in the region of 1.5 to 1.75 billion pounds. That is going to be a record, and it will be backdated because Man City's deal with Etihad actually restarted in the 2024-2025 season. How on earth is any other club not allowed to even compete with that type of investment? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that every single club should be allowed to go absolutely gung-ho and we should throw all financial modelling out the window. What we do need to do is take the good out of PSR, which was to promote financial stability. But what has to change is this them and us two-tier system where clubs X can do one thing and the rest of all of the other clubs are not allowed to even compete. Number 2, Newcastle Stadium, plans, capacities, etc. So a really respected journalist up in Newcastle, Craig Hope, reported yesterday that Newcastle are not going to be primarily focusing on the stadium this year. The primary focus now will be on a sporting director, the training ground, and then afterwards the club's emblem and the stadium plans. We know that the new CEO, David Hopkinson, came in a couple of weeks ago to replace the outgoing Darren Eales. The next biggest vacancy was the sporting director role. It's being reported that Newcastle are looking at Ross Wilson, who's currently the sporting director at Nottingham Forest. On the training ground update, it's reported that news will be coming out in autumn. We are currently in autumn. They're saying that they did look at a new training ground, but the price of that space was too much, so they've walked away. And there's 2 possible sites for the training ground. One is in Gosforth Park, leveraging off the land owned by the Rubens family, who are part owners of Newcastle. And the second one is in Portland as well, which is also being considered. As I said, plans for the emblem have been pushed back due to consultation needed between us, the fans. That means we will have the club emblem as it currently looks for this season and for next season. So therefore, we will only see a new club emblem at the beginning of the 27-28 season. Personally, I do love the 1988 version. I saw Tonali wearing it in an interview this week and I think it looks brilliant. But let's talk about the potential stadium capacity. For argument's sake, let's look at 2 possibilities. So in terms of redeveloping St James's Park, we've got a 52,000 seater. It is a beautiful stadium. It's the cathedral on the hill. I don't think that's the way to go. If you think we should stay at St James's Park and redevelop, please let me know in the comments your reasons why. But let's talk about a new stadium and let's talk about the capacity. For argument's sake, let's just assume it's in Leazes Park, the park right next to St James's. So let's put a quick graphic up here just showing the list of all the Premier League stadiums and their relevant capacities. As you can see, Man United are at the top there with 74,000. We know the news broke out a couple of months ago that they are looking at building a brand spanking new 100,000 seater. But the project is currently being delayed due to a land price dispute with Freightliner, a company who are demanding £400 million for that land that Man United only value at £40 to £50 million. But let's assume that will go ahead and they'll eventually have a 100,000 seater. Next on the list is Tottenham Hotspur's brand spanking new stadium at just under 63,000. But as you can see by that list, other than West Ham, who are randomly in 3rd position in terms of their capacity, and Chelsea, who are quite low, the list is pretty consistent in terms of the order of the Premier League, in terms of the most successful clubs having the biggest stadiums. Now let's talk about what the potential capacity for Newcastle's new stadium should or could be. It was announced earlier in the year that Newcastle were looking at a 65,000 seater. There was a lot of uproar from fans saying that that is nowhere near enough seats for Newcastle to take the club forward, and I 100% agree with that view. So the question is, what should the stadium capacity be? And if Newcastle are going to take the time and consult with fans over what this should be, we do need to give our views and suggestions. But this is not a number that we could simply pluck out of thin air. One of the biggest concerns from Darren Eales, the outgoing CEO, was whether or not we could fill a stadium regularly, whether or not we're playing Barcelona in the Champions League or Bradford in the Carabao Cup. I'm going to put another graphic up here in terms of stadium capacities. This is data from last season, the 2024-2025 season. As you can see, Leicester are at the top of the list in terms of an average 99.1 capacity, and Newcastle are down in 7th at 98. So in effect, there's no real difference. It is also worth noting that these stadium capacities are based on tickets sold, not actually bums on seats. But 14 of the 20 Premier League clubs averaged over 95% capacity. So you could argue most Premier League clubs could actually increase their capacity. But the question is by how much? If, for example, you look at the number of people on the waiting list for a ticket to St James's Park to watch Newcastle take on Barcelona in the Champions League, there was over 100,000 people in the waiting list looking to buy a ticket. If you add the 50,000 that already got tickets and the 100,000, that obviously gives you a number of 150,000. But this is a dream Hollywood game. Newcastle, Barcelona, Thursday night Champions League. People are going to be flying in from everywhere to try and see this game. The real question is every single Premier League game, every Carabao Cup, how many fans can we get into the stadium? It is massively important to think about safety and accessibility to the stadium. God forbid something happened, you need to safely be able to get all of those people out of the stadium in X amount of time. If you're talking about a 120,000 seater stadium as well, I mean, how far away from the pitch are you going to be where the players are like little ants? Is that really going to be value for money in terms of being there? You also have to consider the environment, the local nature, the greenland, the sightlines, the accessibility of natural daylight to the buildings and the residents all in the surrounding area. In terms of travel and transport and getting people to and from the stadium safely and quickly. But I'm going to put another graphic up here in terms of season tickets. If you look at season tickets, of Newcastle's 52,000, 30,000 of those tickets are season ticket holders. 3,000 tickets are allocated to away fans up in the gods. And as of July 2025, there is reportedly 40,000 people on the waiting list for a season ticket. If you add that 30,000 and the 40,000 people, that already gives you 70,000, excluding the away tickets, excluding hospitality, excluding the accessible seating, and we're already at 75,000. If you look at the World Cup in 2030 in Saudi Arabia, in those stadiums that the Saudis are going to be building, we should have the know-how and the expertise and the architects and the construction firms that are able to deliver a stadium, and that stadium should fit into the environment. It shouldn't be an absolute eyesore to look at. It should be something that sits proudly in the environment, and if it can include things like a hotel and a car park and maybe a retractable roof to deal with the weather up north, there's absolutely no reason why Newcastle Stadium can't be between 75 and 80,000 seats. Newcastle have already increased their matchday revenue from 37 to 50 million pound just over the last 2 years. We should be pushing the agenda to increase that even further. Do you think 75, 80,000 seats is too much or too little? Do you think we should stay and expand St James's Park? Please let me know. If you like what you're hearing, please do give us a like and subscribe, and don't forget,